Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I like to discuss some welcome Brexit related news as the UK government shelves plans indefinitely for replacing the CE standard mark in Britain for the UKCA mark. I'll explain why this is important and why it was also inevitable. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So if I had to point out some aspect of Brexit which was particularly Boris Johnson-esque, the UKCA mark would be it. We're all familiar with the CE mark. It is the mark of goods which meets the standards of the EU single market, gold standard around the world. Boris Johnson's approach to Brexit was that we would do everything our own way. Even if it meant doing it in exactly the same way as the EU, we would add extra costs just to show we were doing it our own way by putting a British stamp on it. Only someone who has never had to pay for anything in their lives, who's never had to accept responsibility, only someone with this sense of deluded optimism that Boris Johnson possesses could possibly champion such an idea. The idea was that manufacturers wanting to sell into the British market would need the UKCA mark. Oh, you've got the CE mark? Yeah, we don't accept that. Oh, it's the same standard? We don't care. Absolute madness. Now, different markets, of course, do have their own standards. You say, well, Phil, America's got a standard. And, yeah, different markets have their own standards. And it's not uncommon for manufacturers selling into different markets to have to adopt different marks, yes. But it's expensive. For each standard your product needs to meet, you need to pay for all the registrations and compliance tests. What was the point in doing that just for the British market when we have no standards above those of the EU? Anything which qualified for the CE mark would also qualify for the British market anyway. If anything, having your own mark would simply be a symbol of lower quality, if unaccompanied rather by the CE mark anyway. It would mean British manufacturers would have to pay twice, indeed some have. Once for being able to sell into the British market, the UKCA mark, and again to be able to sell into the EU market, the CE mark. And remember, it's not just the overall product that needs the mark, individual components, everything. The cost becomes really quite onerous for some industries. But there was a second problem as well, much more important problem. So let's imagine a scenario. Let's imagine you're an EU-based manufacturer of a component. It might be a part for, say, elevators. So you produce these components. They're necessary parts of maintenance, right? The component, absolutely essential. Elevator won't work without it. It's not expensive. You don't need them very often, maybe every couple of years, let's say, but they are absolutely essential. But commercially, let's say it's not worth having more than one factory in Europe that makes them. Now, this company registers the components for the CE mark because that allows them to sell to all their customers around Europe, right? But now the UK government is saying, well, if you want to sell them into the British market, you're going to have those components registered for the UKCA mark. So the factory has a look at the books and they weigh up the costs of compliance with the sales to the UK. And they decide, well, we don't actually sell enough to you to make it worthwhile because it's relatively inexpensive component. We only sell so many of them. It's only for maintaining elevators every couple of years. It's not really worth it for us. They don't sell enough to Britain to justify the cost. So they just stop selling to Britain. We cannot now import those components. Now, the elevators can't be maintained. So elevators in Britain now have a shelf life of whatever, 2 years, let's say, I don't know, after which you need to replace the whole thing because it won't work. You can't get the component. Well, that's not viable. And this is what would have happened. Lots of complex machines wouldn't be able to be maintained because of a lack of relatively inexpensive components, but essential components. Elevators, x-ray machines, cars. And just to be clear, it wouldn't even need to be an EU-based factory. I just said that because most of them would be, but it could be a British factory. Could be based in Britain, up the road. We might have seen the bizarre situation where a British manufacturer is producing these components. They've got the CE mark. They're selling them solely to the EU market because we'd be desperate for those components. Can you sell up down the road? There's a shopping centre with an elevator. We need some of those components. Sorry, I'm not allowed to sell it to you. It's illegal. I need this UKCA mark, and it's too, you know, the components are too cheap. It's not worth it. So we'd have this mad situation where a British-based factory producing components that Britain needs, but can't sell them to Britain. This is how batshit insane Brexit would have become if the government had ever gone ahead and implemented this requirement for the UKCA mark. They kept setting dates for it and then extending it by a year. And the reason was because it would prevent the operation of so many vital machines that they did. It wasn't the extra cost for the businesses. The Tories have been imposing those on British businesses for years without giving a single shit. No, it was the political backlash from voters who were saying, can you explain to me why my car can't work? Or medical equipment that can't be maintained because of Brexit. And now the government have formally said that the CE mark will be acceptable in the British market indefinitely. They're not saying forever, but they are now saying indefinitely. There's no date now by which we will switch. Now, you could argue a bit of a pain for the businesses who already paid the superfluous extra registration because, you know, there are some products where you can see the UKCA mark and the CE mark alongside. But it at least removes a major headache for the manufacturing industry in general. A welcome oasis of pragmatism in the desert of Brexit stupidity. And I'll link an article in The Guardian where it reports on the news, but I'm going to point out one thing. In it, it says that the UKCA mark had been expected to replace the CE mark for goods sold in Britain from the end of 2024. Bollocks, was it? It was initially supposed to happen, of course, when we left the single market. Then it was going to happen at the end of 2021, then at the end of 2022, then at the end of 2024. It's never going to happen. There were some aspects of Brexit I've not been sure about. You know, like, will they, won't they on the standards controls? I sort of feel they are now going to go ahead with them, but I'm not absolutely certain. There are some things it's like, I'm not sure. You know, were we, for example, going to trigger a trade war with the EU over the Northern Ireland Protocol? I wasn't quite sure. I sort of thought not, but I wasn't quite sure. The Tories are quite insane. But even they weren't crazy enough for this. This is orders of magnitude crazier than anything else to do with Brexit. Crazier than Liz Truss. Within no time at all, we'd have ground to a halt. The shortage of small numbers of vital components would have been catastrophic. I've said for years, there was absolutely zero chance of this CE standard ever being withdrawn from the British market. I was never surer of any prediction where Brexit is concerned. The fact that the decision has been made now as opposed to waiting until next year is welcome. That's good. It means businesses can avoid one aspect of the Tory Brexit uncertainty. It's a sign that the government are willing to be pragmatic. In theory, the decision is, according to the report, to allow time for businesses to get ready properly for the switch. The switch is not coming. The switch was never coming. It's now been indefinitely put on hold. When Labour come in, what I hope happens is at some point they'll be asked, at some point a journalist will ask, okay, so, you know, the previous government put the UKCA mark permanently on hold. What's your response? And I hope that the minister who answers that question says, stop asking such stupid bloody questions. Of course, we're not dropping the CE mark. This is not to say there's no role for the UKCA mark. If Brexit, you know, if we were to imagine Brexit were to continue under the diverging Tories, there would still be some products which could legally be sold in the British market, but not the EU single market. So we would need a mark for that, wouldn't we? To show that it was of the standard required of the British market, but too low a standard for the EU market. It would essentially become the symbol for poor quality, like I say. I imagine the shit emoji must be trademarked, otherwise that would have been the perfect symbol, wouldn't it? But that is one good piece of Brexit news anyway. Every little helps. We don't get them much. It is, as I say, an oasis in the Tory stupidity desert. There was some bad Brexit news as well, which I think I'll be discussing in my next video. But until then, those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.